先生、最初はスープからでしょうか、それとも麺からでしょうか。
最初はまずラーメンをよく見ます。
はい。
丼の全容をラーメンの湯気を吸い込みながらしみじみ鑑賞してください。スープの表面にキラキラと浮かぶ無数の油の玉。
Something that I find deeply fascinating is the intersection between history and food. How the foods our ancestors consumed just to survive developed into a culture that is unique to every people, every place, every civilization. How they evolved over time to form the global arena of cuisine that we know today. And that got me thinking, why is there such a divide, not just in foods but in culture itself, between the West and the East? Why does our food look like this, while their food looks like this? This video will not contain the answer to that question. It's simply too big for a person of my meager subscriber count and lack of any legitimate qualifications to answer. My videos usually consist of me writing a script, not knowing just what I'll say, but hopefully finding some interesting tidbits and asking some hopefully intriguing questions along the way. So if you enjoy this, please consider hitting that subscribe button, and let's begin. Before we can consider what makes the West and the East so different, I wanted to start by looking at what unites us. One of the central questions in sociology is the idea of cultural universals, or things which all societies, no matter the time or location, have in common. Things such as a concept of family and marriage, the creation of a language, or reverence for the dead. These are, of course, highly debatable, but I wanted to consider if there is anything universal to all cultures with respect to food. I don't mean things that would be common sense like eating vegetables, eating meat, or making bread from grain, because obviously people everywhere at any time eat the things around them that are edible. But if there's one single complex practice that exists, regardless of time or place, it is the rule of three. The rule of three, which I don't know if anyone else calls it that, roughly means that the cuisine of every culture can be reduced to a starting point of 3 aromatic vegetables. That doesn't mean that every dish has them or that every dish can only have them, but that generally speaking, a culture's defining dishes usually start from this point. The most common example that you may know is the French mirepoix, which refers to onion, celery, and carrots. When French settlers established Louisiana, or New France, they found that, well, carrots don't really grow there. So the cuisine that they developed centered around onion, celery, and peppers. Italy also uses the mirepoix, but they call it sofrito. Germany has suppengrün, which uses leeks instead of onion. And yes, many Asian countries developed a mirepoix of their own, predominantly using garlic, ginger, and scallion. Again, this doesn't mean that every dish from any region will include all 3, but it's fascinating to consider that when anyone, anywhere, decides to make something delicious, something that will ultimately define their people's culture and history, they all have the idea to use 3 delicious aromatic vegetables as their starting point. But that is something that all cultures seemingly have in common. What about things that they don't? What about a food rule that is completely different in the West and the East? Well, I've found one that I find downright fascinating. The treatment of garlic. Okay, so let's say you're a Westerner and you need to saute some onions and garlic. Just throw them in the pan, right? Absolutely not. Because whether you're American or British, French or Italian, you never, ever, ever want to throw onions and garlic in a hot pan at the same time. The reason being that, regardless of whether you want to lightly cook those onions or fully caramelize them, the garlic will be burnt by the time that happens. And burnt garlic is considered a cardinal sin for any and all Western countries. Because as much as we Westerners love our garlic, it is always to be gently simmered, lightly toasted, never burnt, and never served raw. Now, let's take a look at how they treat garlic in Eastern countries. Yeah, this one stands out to me because it's so funny to hear Italian and French cooks talk about garlic, which I love, as if it's fragile and must always be handled gently and with care. But in Japan, they're like, screw it. Throw it in hot oil and just leave it there until it is absolutely charred to the point of disintegration, and we'll call it a delicacy to put on ramen. And all over Asia, deep-fried garlic is enjoyed as a condiment on everything. It's pretty funny in contrast. So we've discussed ideas about food that the East and West have in common and others that are vastly different. But that still doesn't begin to answer the question, why? Why does food from the other side of the planet seem so foreign and exotic to Western palates? Well, it's complicated, so let's take a closer look. Some things are obvious. If, due to climate for example, the primary grain grown in an area is rice, rice will be prominently featured in that area's cuisine. But instead of simply stating they grow a lot of rice, so that's why they eat rice, let's take it a step further. Besides the presence of rice, what else is different between these two dishes? Well, whether it's American pot roast, Sunday roast, prime rib, beef bourguignon, or coq au vin, many popular Western meals start with a very large piece of meat that's been cooked gently at a low temperature for a very long time. And this isn't unique to Europe or USA either. In the Americas, we have barbecue. In Mexico, there's barbacoa. Dating as far back as ancient civilizations go, in pots, ovens, or even a hole in the ground, Westerners were cooking large pieces of meat or whole animals low and slow for centuries. That's not to say that no one in the East was or is, but when you look at most Eastern cuisine, whether it's a Chinese stir-fry, Korean barbecue or bulgogi, Japanese yakiniku, pho, or a pad thai, you generally see meat cut into much smaller pieces and cooked at a high heat for a relatively short amount of time. And the reason for this, as I think I understand it, is, well, wood. Generally speaking, trees that grow in Asia tend to be softwoods like poplar and cypress trees, woods which are lighter and, most importantly, burn quickly, while trees that grow in Europe and the Americas are considered hardwoods. Oak, beech, elm, and maple are much harder and burn much more slowly, meaning that cooking a large roast of meat would require considerably more wood grown in Asia than it would with wood grown in the West. And with wood being a vital resource for everything from warmth to shelter, Asian cuisines, like anything, developed around efficiency, the most efficient way to cook meats quickly while burning as little wood as possible. This could also explain why we don't see much bread being baked in Asian countries. Baking bread in Europe developed using huge industrial or even communal ovens that utilized slow-burning wood. So this might explain why in the East you see their attention to dough used for things like noodles, dumplings, and bao, which are cooked using steam or moisture rather than direct heat. But again, I don't know. I'm just a guy looking stuff up and trying to make sense of it all. But if you want to add your 2 cents to the conversation or just tell me what I got wrong, let me know down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.